Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. It is a sunny Sunday in Chicago here as we are, well, I guess reeling after a 3-1 defeat at Soldier Field. The Fire go back to their actual home and start playing like that. They're at their actual home yet again. We've got a full house today, though, so it's all good. I've got Tim, Alan, and DJ with me. Fellas, sound off in the order you're called. How are we feeling? Tim, kick us off.
Man, you say it's like the Fire's actual home, but it's clearly they've got a roommate, as was obvious by looking at the pitch on that one. But I mean, hey, like whatever, you roll with it. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we heard you like football, so we put a football field on your football field and played football on your football field. Alan, how are you? How are you recovering?
To say that the honeymoon phase with our roommate, the Bears at Soldier Field, is over is an understatement.
Okay, all right. So we are now dating the Bears in this scenario. Interesting. DJ, how are you feeling?
I cannot wait for the Bears to no longer be our roommate and for us to have our own stadium.
I think that's a common refrain this weekend. Oddly, the Vikings in the locker room that is the away team locker room for the NFL. It's the locker room the Fire use. There were still whiteboards with their tactics and plans and stuff like that we were taking a look at while we were waiting to chat with players, which I thought was kind of funny. But hey,
what you're saying is that the Fire should give that information on to other NFL teams for a price.
Yeah, it was really, really insightful stuff. The kind of thing that you really need to be a professional though to understand. Like try to force turnovers, which no one has ever thought about in the game of football before.
Hey, that's a good point, Tim. But no, we are as previously mentioned, we are here. About 15 hours removed from a Chicago Fire meltdown at Soldier Field. Stop me if you've heard that one before. Fire losing 3-1 against New York City FC as the Pigeons take a firm hold on that 8th spot in the East. Actually, I think moving up to 7th, if I'm remembering the table correctly, because of Inter Miami's loss last night. Before we jump fully into the game, though, we are going to talk a little bit of news. Not much in the way of the world. Couple that we missed on Wednesday when we recorded. I will shout out David Pareba making his first appearance back since tearing his ACL in a did he start for Fire too? I'm sorry, guys. I actually didn't write it down.
Off the bench.
Yeah,
I believe.
Off the bench, but converted a penalty in a victory for Fire 2, which clinched a playoff spot for the second team. So really wonderful to see David back.
Percolator.
Yeah, wonderful.
No, that's just like that's poetry, man. Like, coming back, the team where you won the MVP and Golden Boot the previous season, spending some time with them, getting back up to full game speed before. Who knows? Like, there's still a realistic possibility he could make his senior debut in 2025, which honestly is, I think, surprising to a lot of us, just given the injury, when he was injured and stuff like that. Ricky Puig had there can be different degrees of ACL, but had that happen in the playoffs, so a couple months before it happened to Pareba, and he has still not been seen. So it could have been a worse tear. It's not about that, but I just know that he has been working incredibly hard to try to get back into game shape, and it just is really rewarding to see for him.
Right. And he's got that world-class performance center too, Tim. Don't forget about that, huh?
Legitimately, it sounds cheesy, but that has been a factor in his recovery, and just having all of the different stuff that they would normally have had to send him out and somewhere else for available there has speeded the recovery, as has the Aqua treadmill, which I don't have in my home. I don't know if either of you have a $600,000 or $1 million Aqua treadmill. Yeah. All right. If I could borrow one of yours sometimes, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, it's a good time to use. But yeah, so really, really wonderful to see that from David, and for the second team, Chicago Fire 2, clinching their playoff spot for the second straight year. So to Tim's point, hopefully he's back soon, but if not, awesome for the second team to have him back, because he's just such an impactful player at that level.
Hopefully we can hear more Percolator in the playoffs.
There you go. Moving from there, Leonardo Barroso did pick up a knock sometime in trading between Thursday and Friday, when Greg said he was going to be ready to roll, and then being put on the injury report and not available Saturday. So we will talk about Jonathan Dean making the start a little bit later on. Tim, any reporting you can kind of shed a little bit of light on there?
We had intended to ask that from Greg Berhalter after the game, but just with the result, I think nobody really wanted to be there asking additional questions. I'm sure we'll find out soon. I mean, obviously, knock in training is the thing that realistically could have happened between Thursday afternoon and Friday, I guess early evening afternoon, when they had to send in the injury report. So here we are.
Yeah. Or we're going to find out it's one of those cases where he was walking through his house and slipped on a duffel bag in the corner or something weird like that. But hopefully it is just a quick knock and we can have Leo back shortly. That brings us to our last piece here. U.S. Open Cup qualifiers in the first round have started. Edgewater Castle advanced after winning 2-1 over Black Cat FC. And then Wisloka Chicago advanced 3-0 over Chicago Strikers. It is not entirely regional here, but Southern Indiana FC with a 10-0 win over Southern Indiana Guardians. That is the fifth biggest margin in the past 10 years of qualifying. There's no goal differential in U.S. Open Cup qualifying. That's at a certain point.
It's just you win and you advance. Well,
so it's a little bit rude at a certain point, right? Just maybe pass the ball around, run the clock out. But who's to say? I get perfect. All three of you.
We're not all built like
shrug.
Southern Indiana FC, John.
Austin, please clip that moment where everybody else went. Huh? All right, perfect.
Just have it. Shrug.
No, but we're going to move on. Talk a little bit of the game that actually happened and played last night at Soldier Field. As mentioned, Chicago Fire losing 3-1 against New York City FC, or Yankees FC, as we've so affectionately dubbed them here in the outline. It's the same score as the reverse fixture and a pretty similar story, even though the Fire did not actually go down to 10 or 9 men. Fire now 5-5-5 at home, which if that doesn't describe this team very, very well, I don't know what does. And they're 3-8-13 all time against NYCFC. There is something about Pigeons that they just seem to beat Fire, I suppose. As mentioned, Joel Waterman did make his debut for the Men in Red. Leonardo Barroso did pick up a knock, missed out, and Jonathan Dean started in his place. Just to give a quick recap, facts-wise, Philip Zinkernagel opened the scoring off a feed from Brian Gutierrez in the 13th minute. That brings him up to 26 goal contributions on the year, so he's only 2 from tying the Nico's record, and he is 3 away from passing and breaking the record and setting one of his own. Brian Gutierrez adding his 4th assist, which, again, just increases his career high of total goal contributions, so another awesome moment for Brian. Alan, I saw you pop your hand up. Question.
Zinkernagel, oi, oi, oi is what we were singing when he scored. It was. I'm loving that we're getting more and more player related chants, especially with that.
Yeah, a lot of fun there. Unfortunately, that type of excitement only lasted so long. In the 40th minute, Nico Fernandez scored the equalizer off an assist from O'Toole. Gutman and Davia over-rotated and just nobody on the back post. He was left unmarked, and Brady did not have much of an opportunity to do much there. Coming back from halftime, Orahel came on for Andre Franco around the 56th minute. No confirmation either way, but it did seem to be kind of a combination of not playing his best game. He is still working himself back into full game shape after not playing for extended periods of time in Portugal. So kind of just a decision that made sense.
That would be my guess too. The first planned sub, and it may have just been accelerated a little bit by game state. And I think the fact that Franco had been, not bad so much as just ineffective so far on that one.
Yeah, 100%. And then immediately after that, Alonso Martinez scores after finding himself unmarked with the ball at his feet immediately after a corner. Just seemed like a bit of a breakdown in communication there on the back post from Davila and maybe Gutman, but probably more Davila. And then did take a little bit of a lucky bounce watching that back. It was clipped Jay's foot, and then Hugo stepped just a little too far to keep it out of the net. So that put New York City ahead just before the 60th minute. And then in the 67th minute, Marin Haile Selassie came on for Jonathan Bamba, with Tom Barlow coming on for Joel Waterman in the 81st. Jay Davila dropped back into that more center back, half back role, meaning Greg only used 3 subs in his 3 windows, so 2 unused substitutions. And then Seymour Reed comes on in the 90th minute and almost immediately scores the dagger 2 or 3 minutes later. It really did feel after that first goal, it was all New York all the time. Fire only had 2 corners on the night. We've talked about that before as the best team in MLS off a corner kick. You can't be going to the line that much, or that little, I should say. Fellas, how are we feeling kind of big picture following the game?
So, the one thing I will say is that you said it felt like it was all New York from that point. I am not entirely sure that I really see that. I think it was New York through a significant portion of the first half, especially after starting not that long after the Fire scored. And it was all New York kind of early in the second half. That's when they scored again. After that, the Fire were getting pressure. They were getting into New York City's box. They were not getting shots off. There was something that would always happen before they got a shot off. And I think talking about why is maybe one of the points of discussion right here, because I have not seen basically any team that was able to get that far, but no farther on such a consistent basis in MLS.
That's a point that I often brought up, especially this season and honestly in previous seasons as well, how well the Fire can move up forward. There were beautiful Ole moments of dribbling past. There were great forward passes and through balls. It was just that final touch essentially. And there were so many times where literally the ball was either in the box or right outside the box, and in front of the players were like just what seemed to be 5 big New York players that would immediately just boot the ball out or immediately take over. It would. I don't want to say it was unlucky, but it was just the fact that they could not get that final touch essentially, or that final pass.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big change from what we've seen throughout most of this season, right? And I think that's one of the reasons the Fire have been so effective and have scored as many goals as they have. And I think that the fact that that did not happen is a big part of this result.
Yeah, well, we talked before the game, right, about NYCFC does have one of the best defenses in MLS, right? They do. They are a stingy defense. Matt Freese, say what you will about him on the national team level. He's a good MLS goalie. He's one of the best in MLS. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to say. And for the record, we saw that last night, right? Matt Freese is part of the reason this game was not closer than it was. He made a few really, really good saves on some open opportunities for the Fire. The other side of the coin, Tim, I'll push back a little bit because Alan mentioned it, and I agree. Like, this is not an uncommon refrain, right? Like, oftentimes when we find the Fire losing games like this, it is because they can't get shots off. It's not because the goalie is standing on his head and keeping everything out. It's because they're taking one too many touches. They're dribbling just a little too far. They're whipping a ball in that doesn't really have a hope of getting there instead of just recycling play.
That's fair. I think that it's also fair to say that at this point, there's been more consistent scoring than there hasn't. But when it hasn't happened, it hasn't felt like it was close. It's not like the games where the Fire have lost. This did not feel like an unlucky result for the Fire here. I think that it felt like a result that was deserved for New York City based on the way that they played on the pitch. And the reason why was that they were like their defense, their like unmovable object of their defense was able to stop the somewhat stoppable force of the Fire's attack.
There were multiple points during the game where from above you can see it very easily. If Guti doesn't pass the Bamba, or if Guti had passed the Bamba would have had a clear shot. Or Zinkernagel took it himself, or Kuipers passed it when he shouldn't have. It was very clear that there just was no communication at a certain point where you need the communication of pass it here, I'm open. Like literally, Bamba I think had 5 yards on the nearest NYC defender, and even if he doesn't get a shot off, he at least gets something so Guti can get into more space.
Yeah, I think the other thing about that is they, at this point, I think the Fire, like, early in the season, Philip Zinkernagel was an unknown quantity in MLS, right? And I think that helped him because teams didn't know how much you had to defend against him. They did a very good job, more or less, taking him out of the game. I think Bamba, teams now have enough tape where they say, look, you can give this guy some space and some time, and he will likely not take the shot. He will take one too many touches. He will look for the pass, and you can get someone in on it. And I think that the Fire, to some extent, have been not quite an open book, but I think maybe a book where everyone kind of feels like they know how the story is going to end. And, New York read the book. And that, I think, helped prepare them. And that's why there were pockets of space in the right places. I think they did a very, very good job isolating Fire attackers. Like, there's, like, the pass map for the Fire in the attacking half is just, I mean, it's almost not even a pass map, right? You basically, like, Zinkernagel basically exists as an island that nobody was able to pass to once you're talking about, like, that deep in the attacking half. He did get some every once in a while and stuff, but that was intentional, and that was New York playing the way that they needed to, getting guys in the midfield at the right moments and stuff like that. And that shut off some of the promising attacks. And they knew that on the other side, you could give Bamba that time and that space. And it's not that Bamba's not dangerous, but it's that the danger isn't exactly the same kind of danger in the same seconds and stuff like that. as it would be on the right.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, I think we saw really well against New England. I think this team plays its best ball, ironically enough, in transition, but also, off a set piece as well. And we saw a few set piece opportunities that were nearly converted in this game. And I think New York setting their line the way they did and playing as compact as they did meant you were not going to get opportunities in transition. They weren't necessarily really strong on a counter press, if that makes sense. They were kind of sitting back, allowing the game to come to them, which kind of takes a lot of bite out of what the Fire are trying to do, right? It's hard to build an overload when everything is very even keel and you're not actually pushing on both sides. The other thing I'll ask, and Tim, I'll let you start, and guys, I'm sure you'll have some input. It did feel like this was, we'll talk about Joel Waterman, I'm sure. Not a great day for Jonathan Dean, a pretty poor day for Jonathan Dean. And I do wonder how much Leonardo Barroso could have impacted this game just with his attacking prowess coming down the right and how that can free up Philip Zinkernagel.
Yeah, so again, we don't know exactly. This is why I wish we'd had the opportunity to ask exactly when Barroso went down. Typically, the way that the Fire do things, early in the week, they're kind of working on patterns and play and stuff like that. That's just focused on this is something that the coaching staff think that they need to work on. Then starting midweek, like Wednesday, Thursday, they start focusing in on what is specific to that opponent for that week. And it's entirely possible that game planning, like I think both Dean and Barroso have given the Fire some good stuff in a lot of the right moments. And they both clearly, I think, are MLS level and belong on MLS teams and all of that, but they're not the same player. And so if the game plan was built with Barroso coming in and doing certain things in mind, and then Dean is being asked to step into that role because that's sort of the game plan, and there's not maybe as much adaptation as you'd have if they had known all week that Dean would be the one starting. I do kind of wonder if a little bit of it is that, but I think part of it is also just Dean can't do everything that well, and this game asked him to do a lot of the stuff that he is not as good at that Barroso is just somewhat better at, like, getting into the box, doing cutbacks, all of those things. And it's 100% not his game. And I think, the fact that Gutman, I think, also had one of his weaker performances is maybe also a little relevant, because I think that says something about the way that New York were able to sort of dominate centrally and isolate fullbacks and keep them from really being able to be contributors, knowing how dangerous play from the fullbacks has been for the Fire this season.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. I do think there was an aspect of, we don't need to stop the talk on the fullbacks, Alan, DJ, if you guys want to kick in there as well. But I do think there was an aspect of not a great performance from Joel Waterman for his first time in red. Not terrible, just not great. He did end up coming off for Davila, and I thought that maybe could have happened sooner, if I'm being honest.
Sorry, you mean Barlow?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Davila moved back, but he came off for Barlow.
Davila started. So yeah. But yeah, that's and again, like I think just says something about the way that Berhalter was viewing his tool chest and what he needed in the game. Obviously trailing at that point, but you don't typically take off a center back and then have your basically like six slide into the center back spot for a forward. Because you think that what your team has been doing has been enough to get a goal.
It was definitely a gamble that did not pay off, honestly.
I mean, in all honesty, if you're going to move Davila back, you should just sub in Pineda or Gonzalez or another actual defender, because you still have a sub left.
I think that the idea, though, was to take off a defender in order to provide something else in the attack there, right? Like that's effectively what the Fire did.
Change of
But
formation.
also, Davila's still not really a center back, but you have other center backs who can do that, like Pineda.
Yeah, but he also he can. If you're asking me, you're down a goal, and do I want Jay Davila playing center back or Sam Rogers playing center back? If that means we get another forward on, I'll take Jay Davila. Honestly, just because he can advance a little farther. At that point, you're selling out. You're trying to get that tying goal because goal differential kind of doesn't matter anymore in a weird way, just with the probabilities of it all. So that to me is kind of the thought process there, right? He's better with the ball at his feet. He can advance play. He can get involved. And frankly, he's just bigger than both those guys, right? you have a set piece coming in. You want the guy who's 6'4" and is a tree. You know what I mean? Like he's huge.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was saying that Jay was a great center back option. And when I asked Berhalter about that after he kind of was pushed into that role one time when the Fire didn't really have anyone on the bench, he seemed to poo-poo the idea of like that being something that was ever going to be tried again, except in, a certain situation. And this is one of those situations where he wasn't really playing a center back. The Fire were trying to go with one center back and then somebody moonlighting as a second center back when they needed to, with a aim of hopefully the play is mostly at the other end of the pitch for the remaining minutes.
Yeah. I do think there's an interesting question to be asked about Tom Barlow. We're just talking generally kind of about what didn't work last night, right? And there is a question to me, Tim, watching a lot of that second half back. It did feel like New York was perfectly content to just sit back and hold the ball and play keep away and look for that opportunity. We saw, I don't know if I can say friend of the show, but I'm going to because I like saying it. We saw friend of the show, Matt Doyle, say it was champagne soccer, a 25 pass sequence that led to that opening goal. But it did seem like that was a big part of how they were playing. The Fire's press was not very intense. And I do wonder, I'm watching this game back like, man, this game was calling for Tom Barlow much earlier than it had him, which feels like a weird thing to say. But for a guy whose main job is I can press the heck out of the ball and hopefully win it back, it did feel like the Fire were missing a lot of that last night.
Hugo Kuipers does a lot of that too, to be honest. Like I know that the scouting report on him early on didn't say something like the guy can press like a machine, but he has been pressing very effectively for the Fire this year. He was also more or less completely isolated, right? And he was when he did get the ball, he was, being asked to play through pressure and stuff like that a lot of the time. So I think that Barlow gives you less in all of those aspects rather than more. And then again, it's like if you I know you weren't saying that you wanted to take Hugo off, but it's still like, then who do you take off? Like, do you want to take off somebody who, like, take off a midfielder, and then the Fire, who were already sort of like conceding some of those battles in the center of the pitch, would be conceding more of them? You're just kind of like moving the pieces around the board of like, sure, if you could have 12 guys on, that would have been given the Fire an advantage. I think end of the day, though, it's a little bit of it was just, I think, I don't want to simplify this too much. New York City played like a playoff team. They played, especially defending, especially pressing and stuff like that, like a playoff game. And the Fire were not really able to match that intensity going the other way. It was harder to. And to that 25 pass sequence that you mentioned, I mean, look, that was the kind of sequence that Berhalter loves his teams to do. They went into the attacking half. They went back to their own half, like pretty deep. They tried to pull the Fire out of position. And when they did, they sprung a quick trap. And the Fire were not able to get back in time and recover to stop that trap once it was sprung, which is just like Berhalter ball 101. And if Pascal Jensen was smart enough to, read the Fire's book and copy some of it, and it worked, then again, like, that shouldn't have been a surprise to the Fire that teams can play that way because they practice it every week.
Yeah. Well said. And that, I think, maybe begs the question as you kind of dive into some of the tactical discussion on what the team does, right? Like, Tim, you and I had a long conversation last night, kind of going back and forth about Andrew Gutman and kind of his role in tactics and maybe the tactics at large. We've talked a little bit this year about there have been some coaching losses, just straight up, that there have been. This kind of felt a little bit even in terms of 50-50 players, coaches. But I think it harkens back to the two big complaints I've had about Greg this year, which is his use of substitutions, right? 3 substitutions in 3 windows, left multiple players on the bench last night that I do think could have had an impact. And we can kind of disagree on that. But in a game that was that physical, I don't like not having Kellen Acosta or Mauricio Pineda even consider to join the game, right? But 2, being a little more rigid in his tactics, right? Not necessarily being as flexible there. And obviously, great teams do what great teams do, and they stick with their guns, whatever. But I do feel like there was an aspect of this game where you could have maybe run something a little different than your norm.
So I think there's 2 really good points there. I think both of which are worth kind of talking about separately. the first is sort of, I think, maybe what the overall game plan was. And this is something that Greg had told us with mics off over the course of the week, and apparently told friend of the pod, I'm going to say it as well because I think she is, Jessica Sharman. And she mentioned it on the broadcast that the Fire at this point are not going to change their stripes this season. Like, they are a team that can attack a lot better than they can defend. And so the strategy to win games is to, sounds reductive, but like score more goals than the other team does and not to keep the other team from scoring goals. And I think that really drove a lot of the substitution choices and a lot of the game plan and everything else, right? Because what offensive options were there on the bench at that point, right? Like, Barlow came on in the 81st minute, didn't really have an impact. I don't think that's really his fault so much as just game state and the way that New York playing. Like, Marin came on early. Like, who else is on the bench that was going to be giving you something offensively?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, right, the answer is like, you don't need something offensively to need something, right? That was a very physical game. The referee very much made it clear, like, I'm not going to blow the whistle. Like, you guys figure it out. You know, call your own fouls. To me, that's where it's, look, yeah, maybe you're not pulling in a direct offensive substitution. Maybe you don't have another awesome forward that you can pull off the bench. I think Marin's very good, but you don't have a second guy. I do think Brian Gutierrez was getting pushed around a lot. Andre Franco, we saw him come out early, was not playing a very good game. And, I like Sergio Orhel quite a bit. I think he's a very good player. Do I think the game warranted Sergio Orhel over Kellen Acosta? We can talk about the talent difference there and the form they've been in. I do think that, to me, is a little bit of rigidity of, this is my fourth midfielder, so I'm putting him in when I take my first midfielder off. And that to me is where
I think it's
a little bit of disconnect.
So, like, look, I could see what you're saying about the physical thing. I think that, one, it's important to realize that New York were not like Broad Street bullies, like, hockey style fighting, stuff like that. Like, they were being physical in the right moments, right? Yeah. And the places that they were being physical are places where, other than maybe just the attitude that Kellen Acosta brings into the squad with him, of like being willing to chirp at guys, being willing to get in guys' faces and stuff like that after stuff, they were not really doing that much to Jay Davila, right? Like, they were doing stuff to Hugo Kuipers, they were getting in on Guti, they were getting in on Zinkernagel.
Yeah.
And so the idea that, like, look, if you wanted to like sub somebody off and sub somebody back on, it's like, okay, well, look, Davila gives you what he gives you, and we're seeing more from him. This was not a good game from him. He does not bring the attitude that Kellen Acosta brings, so put Kellen Acosta on. Again, I think that the change is that I think that like, Jay Davila was hitting some pretty good progressive passes at different points, and I think that the feeling is that Kellen gives you less.
Tim, yeah, not to cut you off, but like, my point is not bringing Kellen Acosta for Jay Davila. My point is, if you're taking off Andre Franco, don't put on Sergio Orhel, right? Put on Kellen Acosta. Like, get a little bit tougher in the midfield. And like, Sergio didn't play poorly, but I don't think he played well enough that we can sit here and say that was definitely the right decision either, right? Yeah, I feel confident saying he didn't have a great impact on the game.
Sure, I agree. I think the idea, though, was that, and like something that, Greg also told us, is that, Sergio Orhel is a player that gives you something on offense. He really doesn't give you a lot defending. I think if the game had been 1-1, which it was when he first came on and stayed 1-1, then I understand bringing Orhel on. So that's why at the moment that decision was made, I think it was the right choice. I think after that, trailing the game, you needed to chase, and it was still going to be the right decision. I think if the Fire had been protecting a 1-0 lead, it would have been a different story. Like, that's when it's like, okay, we need to start being willing to bring to their offense what they are bringing to ours. But I think that you are making I don't know if you want to, like, happy to like talk about this more, but I think that moving on to the second point, which I think is really valid, which is the in-game management from Greg Berhalter, because something that I think we've seen pretty consistently as a criticism of Berhalter from his time with the Columbus Crew, with the U.S. men's national team, and now in Chicago, is that he is a good game planner. He has not been as effective at switching things in the middle of games when the Fire or his team are kind of getting beat with some of the tactics and choices. That's something that caused, I think that it was probably a game that the Netherlands were going to win in the World Cup. I think that Berhalter's inability to make adjustments sort of hastened that exit and made it more of a lopsided game than it could have been. And I think that that's also something that we saw tonight of the plan A wasn't working and there was not a plan B that was ready to be opened up and tried. Maybe that's limitations in the squad. Maybe there was the limitations in the squad in the World Cup as well. But it is something that's dogged him. And I think it's a valid criticism in this game and a lot of other times too.
Limitations in the squad, honestly, Tim, you mentioned it earlier, like in the position that the Fire were, looking at the bench, especially after the first few subs were made and the Fire kept going, just the ship kept taking on water. It was like, do we have the replacement parts? And when you're looking at it, it's like with what Greg was especially trying to do, the answer is no, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, like there's no offense to any of the guys that are on the squad, a lot of whom have improved a lot over the course of the season. But I think the one guy that you can, I think in your mind's eye, be like, oh man, that was a great highlight reel we got from that guy. That one guy on the bench was Marin Haile Selassie, and he was the first sub on. And I don't know, like at this point, the jury's out on Franco and what he can give and what he can't. My guess would be that Franco can do a lot of that and probably more, maybe at a higher level than what Marin gives you in a different position and part of the pitch. But there really aren't a lot of other difference makers. Again, also no offense to Tom Barlow and his hat trick against DC.
Yeah. On that point, I think it's going to be very interesting this offseason to see what happens, because Berhalter getting a year where now he's going to bring in the depth, that will be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the Fire replaced 16 players over the course of the season. That's more than half the squad, but that also means half the squad is sticking around. And that's frankly a lot of turnover in two windows, considering especially the first window, how much of it happened. But there's clearly some players on the roster that, I think are maybe not performing as expected. Kellen Acosta, I think, would be probably the leader in that category of he looked like a great signing when he came in, but for the minutes that he's had alone is not worth what the Fire are paying him, and the salary cap hit for that just from a cap management point of view.
13 players are on the list of either out of contract or on options for next year, right off the bat. Mm-hmm. So there's about at least 5 players probably leaving.
Yeah. Now, I mean, some of them, right, like some guys like Acosta is still under contract, and I think that that's one that, again, is just with the weight of a heavy TAM contract is something that you have to navigate one way or another. There's, Jonathan Dean, who is in line to get a raise, and I hope that the Fire find a way to pay him what he's worth, because I think that we've seen nothing but growth in him shattering expectations. But, at the same time, I would expect that this would also be a busy winter coming up for the Fire.
Yeah,
and rightfully so.
Dean is out of contract this year.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I think that he, he is going to be expecting a big raise. He deserves a big raise. I don't know, just with all the other needs that the Fire have, if they will be able to meet what is a fair ask from Dean and keep him on the squad.
We talked about it Wednesday, right? He's not eligible for free agency, which does help the Fire. So you have to think at a minimum you'll get something back for him. The other side of the coin with that, and we mentioned it on last one as well, is like you can double his salary and it's still pretty much nothing. He's making $200,000 a year, so he's making.
Yeah, I mean,
just
if I'm
over
Dean's agent,
right
and I forget who his agent is off the top of my head. I'm probably asking for north of that, frankly, just given the minutes and what he's contributed. Yeah. But this is a separate conversation we'll be having.
I was going to
hopefully in December, but maybe earlier.
I was going to say this conversation of what does the offseason look like would be great if the Fire were still not in a playoff spot, right? And fighting for seeding to get into the playoffs, sitting in that 9th seed right now, thanks to a New York Red Bulls loss that could very easily change, as I believe Red Bulls plays midweek this week. But regardless, thank you, DJ.
City plays this week. Bulls don't. New Jersey is out of the contention right now.
That was the confusion there on my end. Thank you, DJ. But yeah, they're still sitting ahead of New York Red Bulls. That could change as soon as Saturday when the Fire go to play Minnesota United away. And that kind of brings us to maybe
the Red Bulls play CF Montreal, which is probably their earliest, their easiest remaining match out of their 4. Having said that, their schedule going ahead: Hudson River Derby, FC Cincinnati, and then Columbus. So it doesn't really get easier for them after next Saturday.
And keep in mind, right, given the current state of things, Fire keep winning, Fire stay in that spot, right? They get results, they're going to stay in that 9th spot for the time being, at least. But But it does kind of bring us to, maybe our last point here, and that is the Fire's playoff chances and what the picture overall looks like. NYCFC is now 5 points ahead with a game in hand. Portland, as we mentioned, did beat Red Bull New York last night, which keeps the Fire's place in ninth secure for at least 6 more days. The Fire are about to enter a little bit of a gauntlet here. Kind of 3 teams at very different points in their season, but all that you should be concerned about: going away to Minnesota, getting Columbus at home, and then away to Inter Miami on a midweek matchup. I believe second or third in a row for Miami, as they are about to enter a gauntlet to make up all the games they've missed this year. Ironically enough, Inter Miami sitting 1 spot ahead of the Fire in the Eastern Conference rankings right now, though I think we would all agree that is more a games played issue than an actual wins or performance issue for Miami.
They have one. Let's see, they've got 4 more points in the Fire, but 3 games in hand, and they have 2 games in hand over New York City, who have 1 point above them. So I mean, look, maybe their supporter shield chances are starting to fade pretty significantly, but I don't think anyone is expecting them to finish in 8th place or 7th place at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But for that to happen, right? Like, they have to win games, and that's something that the Fire are going to try to have a say in. Like, I think that Toklamati put on a clinic against them in a 3-0 win for Charlotte on Saturday. And yeah, I mean, look, it's that time of the season when we're going to be doing more and more of this, but the truth of the matter is, even though they're difficult opponents, just getting single points can matter, right, in the grand scheme of things. Because a single point would mean that at best, the Red Bulls could be level with the Fire on points, and then that kind of keeps you in that conversation. And the Fire had a 0-0 draw against Miami earlier this year.
Yeah. I think the one thing you worry a little bit about is just purely mentality. Tim, you made the point. New York City looked like a playoff team last night. They looked like one of the 6 or 7 best teams in the East, or 7 or 8, whatever you want to say. And the Fire didn't. I had multiple people stop me after the game and say, this, I know we're going to make the playoffs. Did not look like a playoff team, right? And this seems to kind of be a common refrain, right? And you're facing 3 teams here who I think all 3 are very winnable games. You almost beat Minnesota away with a pretty rotated side in the Open Cup quarterfinals. You got kind of mollywopped by Columbus earlier in the year, but that was very beginning of the season. And now Columbus is on one heck of a skid. They're not playing well recently. And then you have Inter Miami, who, Tim, to your point, they're about to play 7 or 8 games in the time the Fire are playing 5. So they're going to need to rest guys somewhere, right? I wouldn't be shocked
with an average age
with
an average age that's about to qualify for the AARP. So.
And with all those teams that we're facing against, as mentioned, the Fire have shown that they can do it, even if, as Tim mentioned, they scrap a point. Because, in Major League Soccer, even a point on the road is still a big victory. Now, the Fire being one of the best teams on the road this season, which is...
It's the point at home that you needed to get, yeah.
It's the point at home at this point. Maybe not just the point at home, the point at Soldier Field being the home. Because Bridgeview, they showed they could do that. Soldier Field, but... Yeah, so they've shown that they could do that, especially even against a team like Columbus, which that was the very first game of the season, and they showed they could do it. They just, shot themselves in the foot, maybe once or twice or 3 times over. So
and I think
entirely possible.
Big picture, statistically speaking, the Fire are still odds-on favorites for that 9th spot. That's the only spot in the postseason where they control their destiny. I asked Greg about that playoff-like intensity and whether he was going to be relying on veterans more to sort of communicate that, because there's a lot of guys that have a lot of MLS experience, like Mauricio Pineda, I think is as the longest tenured guy in the squad, is one that you look at. A lot of experience around the league, no playoff experience because the team has not taken him there, right? And there are guys like Jack Elliott, Joel Waterman was on some pretty good teams in Montreal, that have that experience. Kellen Acosta, Omar Gonzalez, for whatever he has or hasn't shown on the pitch, that guy has won everything there is to win on this continent, with both club and country. And I think that's why he was brought in more than anything else, was to be a guy that is not a coach that has that experience. So there's that experience around. I think it's relying on it, communicating that, and having the trust between guys to find a way to say something to someone in the middle of a game, Berhalter did say like he felt like the intensity kind of dropped for about 10 minutes or so there. And I think that those are the 10 minutes where it looked like the Fire would make it into New York's box and just run out of ideas. You can't do that as much in a playoff game. When I asked Greg about like just the playoff intensity, he's like, look, we're not there yet. But I think what you want to see with the Fire's 5 remaining games, with 3 of them against really tough opponents, if the Fire can come up with a win, I don't think it really matters how. It can feel like stealing 3 points. But a win against a top opponent, one, that helps that alone is a huge boon to the playoff chances. And 2, that then is something that you can use as a squad when you make the postseason and say, look, sure, we're the bottom seed in this best of 3 series in the first round after making it through the play-in. They're a better team than us, but we have shown that we can be a better team on the night, even if they were a better team on the season. And here's how we can do it. And I think that alone can be huge in galvanizing the group and giving them that confidence, considering the number of guys that don't have it. I mean, don't have experience to sort of like take the place of swagger.
And even just making that 9th place and the title of the game, not just being MLS regular season, but MLS playoffs sponsored by Audi, whoever, wildcard, even that just
driven by Continental, all that stuff.
Driven by Continental.
Hydrated by Moss Plus, yeah.
Then whatnot, like quite literally all the, and kits provided by Adidas and whatever. That already changes, that changes the aspect of the game. And that gives the players, especially like you mentioned, those who, who are good, but they just have not had that, even a playoff and a whiff of playoffs, even just that.
And I think that's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even just for the players, but the fans.
9th place or 8th place, I don't think really matters that much. 7th place, I think, is starting to look like a pipe dream, but it's still kind of mathematically maybe in the mix, but they'd need other teams to hit a skid. Making the postseason, I think, would feel like progress to the fan base. I feel like it would feel like progress to the team. And I feel like it gives everyone something to feel like that you're building off of for next year. Mm-hmm. The Fire are clearly a better team than they've been in recent seasons. And I think that even if, despite being a better team, if that does not translate into a single postseason game, I think that there will be a amount of frustration and nothing changes and almost like helplessness that's going to come from a large part of the fan base and maybe parts of the squad as well, of like, we did it. We got more points than we did last year. We played better. And in the end, it didn't matter. And I think that's why it's so essential that they just get the results they need to at least secure that 9th spot.
It is worth mentioning, too, after these 3 games, the Fire will play at home against Toronto, who are terrible at home or are terrible away. And then they will go to New England on the final day. And New England is somehow worse than the Fire at home. So if you can get even just 4 points out of the next 4 games or the next 3 games, and you win those 2 games, you're looking at a really good season. You're at 52 points, which is generally more than enough to get through to the playoffs.
I mean, look, the line's normally 45 or 46. It's clearly going to be higher in the East this year. That's the challenge more than anything else. I think that if you look at the 3 opponents that the Fire have coming up, it's like you can convince yourself that it's more likely to get 0 points than it is to get 1. And 4, I think, would be outperforming that. But I think it's something that, like, again, they have the talent, they have the ability. It just is like actually seeing it that I think that we're looking for.
Yeah, all's going to come down to that mentality at the end there. Kind of make or break for the Fire here as they enter this 3-game stretch. I think it's going to tell us a lot about who this team is and what the future holds there. Fellas, anything we want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's like, look, it's a result that feels kind of familiar, right? Like conceding off of an unmarked man on the back post. It's like, and the Chicago Fire, name a more comfortable, if not dynamic duo. But I think that the question is, can this team respond to that differently with a game against a team that's looking for a supporter shield, possibly more realistically on the horizon this year in Minnesota. And we'll talk about that in a couple of days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want there to be something a bit more than a quote from Ange Postecoglou. Every time I think I see the light at the end of the tunnel, it turns out to be an oncoming train. I would like it to be an actual light.
God, I need Big Ange to make his way to MLS at some point.
Yeah.
But
Big Ange in MLS, that'd be amazing.
Oh, golly. All right. Well, that is as good a place as any to wrap it up as we opine about Big Ange. As always, give us a follow anywhere and everywhere that you consume your social media content. That's Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads. maybe one day Facebook too. We haven't really had more conversations about it, even though I say it every time.
You say it every time, and somebody's updating the Facebook every single time.
Oh, heck yeah. You follow meninred97.com. That's where you can stay up to date with all the actual news and reporting from Tim, from Alex, from Max, from everybody who writes over there for the site. That's where you can stay up to date with all the breaking news and opinions and thoughts and stuff like that. Really wonderful. Peace out. We'll have the 5 things you learned up by the time you're hearing this, excuse me. So go give that a read.
Seeing this as well since we're in video.
Yeah, there we go. Although you're really only seeing clips now. We haven't done full video yet. But yeah, also let us know if you like that. If you do, cool. If you don't mention it. With that, also wherever you're listening, if you could, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and follow, subscribe on Spotify, hit the little like button. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that subscribe button. Absolutely put it in the dirt. And then just lightly tap the like button as well. Maybe leave a comment. Helps with the algorithm. And we've always said the only way you can grow is by actually sharing a little bit. So let folks know and pass it along if you have the ability to do so. I think that puts us in a really good spot. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. For Tim, for Alan, for DJ, and for our illustrious producer, Austin, I'm John. It's been a pleasure to have you, and come on, you men in red.